After months of hard work, I finally took a holiday. My job as a graphic designer kept me busy, and I rarely took time off. I decided to spend my holiday in a small, picturesque village far from the city. I rented an Airbnb to enjoy the quiet and beauty of the countryside. The village was charming, with cobblestone streets, old cottages, and friendly locals. The Airbnb was a cozy little house at the edge of the village, surrounded by trees and a small garden. It looked perfect for a peaceful retreat. When I arrived, I was surprised to find that the keys to the house were missing. I searched my bag, thinking I had misplaced them, but they were nowhere to be found. I called the host, a man named Mr. Green, who assured me there was a spare key hidden under the doormat. I found the key and let myself in. The house was quaint, with wooden floors, a stone fireplace, and old-fashioned furniture. It felt warm and welcoming. I unpacked my things and settled in, looking forward to a relaxing week away from work. As night fell, I prepared for bed. The village was so quiet, it felt like the world had stopped. I was drifting off to sleep when I heard a faint noise. It sounded like someone was trying to unlock the front door. My heart raced as I listened carefully. The noise continued for a few minutes, then stopped. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, but when I opened it, no one was there. I checked the lock and made sure it was secure. Then I returned to bed, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. The rest of the night was quiet, but I slept fitfully. The next morning, I went outside to get some fresh air and noticed the spare key was gone. Panic surged through me as I searched the area around the doormat. The key had vanished. I called Mr. Green again, but he didn't answer. I decided to explore the village and try to forget about the strange incident. The day passed peacefully. I visited the local bakery, walked along the river, and chatted with some villagers. Everyone was friendly and welcoming. By the time I returned to the Airbnb, I felt more at ease. That evening, as I was reading a book by the fireplace, I noticed something odd. There was a small, crumpled note on the coffee table that hadn't been there before. I picked it up and read the message. "I am watching you." My hands trembled and I looked around the room, feeling a chill run down my spine. I searched the house but found nothing unusual. I tried to brush it off as a prank, but unease gnawed at me. I locked all the doors and windows, hoping to keep whatever it was outside. The night was long and filled with strange noises. I heard faint whispers, footsteps, and the occasional sound of someone trying to open the door. Each time I checked and found nothing. My nerves were frayed by morning. When I woke up, I found another note, this time on the kitchen counter. "You can't hide." I felt a growing sense of dread. As I made my way through the house, I noticed strange symbols drawn in red ink on the walls and furniture. They looked like some kind of ritual markings, and I felt sick to my stomach. I tried calling Mr. Green again, but still no answer. I considered leaving, but my car wouldn't start, and I had no signal on my phone. I felt trapped and isolated. My anxiety grew as the day went on. That night, the sounds returned, louder and more frequent. I could hear someone moving around the house, whispering and laughing softly. I hid in my room, clutching a kitchen knife, and tried to stay awake. I felt like I was losing my mind. In the early hours of the morning, I heard a noise from the attic. I had forgotten the house even had an attic. With shaking hands, I climbed the narrow stairs and pushed open the creaky door. The attic was dark and filled with old furniture and boxes. In the corner, I saw a small, flickering light. I moved closer and found a laptop with the screen on. It was showing a live feed from hidden cameras placed all around the house. I saw myself on the screen, sitting in the attic, and a figure standing behind me. I turned around, but no one was there. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized the host, Mr. Green, had been watching me the entire time. The cameras showed footage of him sneaking into the house, placing the notes, and drawing the symbols. I quickly grabbed the laptop and ran out of the attic. I locked myself in my room and called the police. This time, I managed to get a signal. I explained everything to the operator, my voice shaking with fear. The police arrived within the hour. They searched the house and found more hidden cameras and disturbing footage of Mr. Green planning something sinister. They arrested him, and I was taken to a safe place. I never went back to that village. The memories of that holiday still haunt me. The experience left a scar on my mind, reminding me that sometimes the most picturesque places hide the darkest secrets. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share these stories with your friends and family. Thanks. I have worked at the gas station for 3 years now. It's a small place with just one other person on the shift with me. We have a good relationship. Mike, my coworker, is like an older brother. He watches out for me, and we share stories to pass the time. Our station is out on a quiet road surrounded by dark woods. Most nights are calm, with just a few customers coming in for gas or snacks. One night, Mike called in sick, so I had to work alone. It was a dark, chilly night, with the wind howling through the trees. The station was quiet, the only sound coming from the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. I felt uneasy being alone. The darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, and the shadows cast by the trees danced like eerie figures. I tried to keep busy by stocking the shelves and cleaning the counter. The clock seemed to tick slower than usual. Around midnight, a car pulled up to the pump. The sound of tires crunching on the gravel made me jump. I looked out the window and saw an old, beat-up sedan. The driver didn't get out. He just sat there staring at the station. I took a deep breath and stepped outside. The cold air bit at my skin. "Need some help?" I called out, trying to sound confident. The man in the car turned his head slowly to look at me. His face was pale and gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. He nodded slowly but didn't speak. I walked over to the pump and noticed that he hadn't even taken the nozzle. He was just sitting there, staring. "Do you need gas?" I asked again. He nodded once more, then finally opened his car door. As he stepped out, I saw that he was wearing a dirty coat and his clothes looked old and worn. He moved slowly, almost as if he was in a daze. He handed me a crumpled bill and mumbled something I couldn't understand. I took the money and started the pump. The man stood by his car watching me with unblinking eyes as the gas flowed into his tank. I felt increasingly uncomfortable. His stare was intense, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. When the tank was full, he didn't move to take the nozzle. I had to do it for him. "Have a good night," I said, trying to end the interaction quickly. He didn't respond, just got back into his car and drove off without another word. I went back inside, locking the door behind me. My heart was racing. I tried to calm down by focusing on my tasks, but the eerie feeling lingered. The wind outside seemed to grow louder, and the shadows inside the station grew darker. I couldn't shake the image of the man's lifeless eyes. Hours passed and the clock showed 3 a.m. I was counting the minutes until my shift ended. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out. The station was plunged into darkness. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my flashlight from under the counter and turned it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but the shadows seemed to press in closer. I checked the circuit breaker, but everything seemed fine. The power outage must have been caused by the storm brewing outside. I tried to call Mike, but my phone had no signal. I was alone, in the dark, with only my flashlight to keep me company. As I walked back to the counter, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps on the gravel. I pointed the flashlight towards the door but saw nothing. The wind howled, making the sound seem even more menacing. I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. I decided to stay behind the counter where I felt a bit safer. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. The footsteps came again, closer this time. My hands shook as I held the flashlight. I heard a faint tapping on the glass door. Slowly, I turned the light towards the door. Standing there with his face pressed against the glass was the man from the car. His eyes were wide, and his mouth was twisted into a sinister grin. My heart pounded in my chest. He didn't move, just stood there staring at me. I backed away slowly, hoping he would go away. But he didn't. He started banging on the door, harder and harder. I felt trapped. There was no way out. The windows were locked, and I was too scared to make a run for it. The banging grew louder, echoing through the empty station. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The man stopped banging and stared at me for a moment longer before turning and walking away into the darkness. I didn't sleep that morning. As soon as my shift ended, I locked up the station and drove home, my hands still shaking. I told Mike about the encounter the next day, and he promised to look into it. But the man never came back. The memory of his lifeless eyes and sinister grin still haunts me. Working late at the gas station has never been the same. Working late at the office was something I had gotten used to. My boss, Mr. Hargrove, always appreciated my dedication. We had a good relationship. He trusted me with important tasks and often said I was like the backbone of the company. My colleagues were nice too, but they had their own lives to go back to after work. I, on the other hand, found comfort in the quiet, empty office. That night, I was the last one in the building again. The office was on the 10th floor of a tall building downtown. The view of the city lights from the large windows was beautiful, but lonely. I sat at my desk, typing away, the only sound being the hum of the air conditioner and the clicking of my keyboard. The dim lights cast long shadows, making the office look almost eerie. I had a lot of work to finish, reports to complete, and emails to send. The stack of files on my desk seemed never-ending. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, I felt a strange unease. The office, usually a place of routine and predictability, felt different that night. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating. Suddenly I heard a noise. It was faint, like a soft thud, but in the stillness of the night it was unmistakable. My heart skipped a beat. I looked around, expecting to see something or someone, but there was nothing. I told myself it was probably just the building settling or the wind. I went back to my work, but the unease lingered. A few minutes later I heard the noise again, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My pulse quickened. Who could it be at this hour? Everyone had left hours ago. I got up from my desk and walked towards the door. The hallway was dark, the lights on motion sensors only turning on when they detected movement. I peeked into the hallway and saw nothing. The lights remained off, confirming there was no one there. I sighed, relieved but still wary. I turned back to my desk, but then I saw it, a shadow moving across the far end of the office. My blood ran cold. Someone was there. I quickly ducked behind my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the footsteps again, slow and methodical, moving closer. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my situation to the operator. They assured me help was on the way, but it would take a few minutes for the police to arrive. Minutes felt like hours when you're hiding from an intruder. I stayed crouched behind my desk, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps were getting closer. I could see the shadow moving along the walls, coming nearer. I had to stay hidden, had to stay quiet. The office, usually a place of safety, felt like a trap. The shadow stopped right in front of my desk. I could see a pair of shoes, worn and dirty, just inches away from me. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. I prayed the intruder wouldn't find me. Suddenly there was a loud crash. The intruder had knocked over a chair, cursing under his breath. He seemed frustrated and angry. He started moving around the office, opening drawers, looking for something. I stayed hidden, clutching my phone, waiting for the police. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of sirens. The intruder heard it too. He started panicking, his movements becoming frantic. He ran towards the door, but it was too late. The police were already in the building. I stayed hidden until I heard the officers' voices commanding the intruder to freeze. I slowly stood up, my legs shaky, and saw the police handcuffing the man. He looked disheveled, his eyes wild. They led him away, and I finally felt a sense of relief wash over me. One of the officers came over to me asking if I was okay. I nodded, still in shock, and explained what had happened. They told me the intruder had been a wanted criminal on the run for weeks. He had broken into the building looking for a place to hide. The office was a mess, but I was safe. The police assured me they would stay until everything was secure. I thanked them, feeling a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. The quiet, empty office that I once found comfort in had become a place of terror. As I gathered my things to leave, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to danger. The office, with its large windows and beautiful view, no longer felt like a haven. I knew I wouldn't be staying late anymore, not after what had happened. The relationship I had with my work had changed that night. The dedication and routine that once defined my evenings were replaced with a need for safety and caution. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, grateful to be alive and determined to never let my guard down again. Kevin and I had been together for 5 years. Our relationship was strong and built on trust and love. We both loved the mountains and often dreamed of spending a quiet weekend in a secluded cabin. So, when Kevin found a charming cabin for rent in the mountains, we were thrilled. It promised a perfect romantic retreat far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The drive up to the cabin was beautiful. The winding roads were surrounded by towering trees, their leaves creating a canopy above us. The air was crisp and clean, a refreshing change from the polluted city air. As we approached the cabin, we were greeted by the sight of a quaint, rustic building nestled among the trees. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. The cabin was perfect, just as we had imagined. It had a cozy living room with a fireplace, a small but functional kitchen, and a comfortable bedroom. However, what caught our attention was the large, old-fashioned attic. The landlord had warned us not to enter the attic, saying it was unsafe and filled with old junk. But Kevin and I were curious by nature. We couldn't resist exploring every corner of our temporary home. After unpacking our bags and settling in, we decided to explore the attic. The entrance was a small, creaky door at the end of a narrow hallway. We pushed it open and were immediately hit by a musty smell. The attic was dark, with only a small window letting in a sliver of light. Dust particles floated in the air, creating an eerie atmosphere. Inside, we found old furniture covered in white sheets. There were wooden chairs with intricate carvings, a rocking chair that creaked with the slightest touch, and a large wardrobe that seemed to loom over us. But the most intriguing item was an antique mirror. It was large, with an ornate gold frame that was tarnished with age. The mirror's surface was cloudy, making it difficult to see our reflections. That night, as we settled into bed, we couldn't shake off the strange feeling the attic had given us. The silence of the mountains was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Just as we were about to drift off to sleep, we heard muffled noises coming from the attic. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Kevin and I exchanged worried glances. We decided to check it out, hoping it was just our imaginations playing tricks on us. We grabbed a flashlight and made our way to the attic. But when we opened the door, the room was empty. The furniture was undisturbed, and the mirror stood in its place, reflecting the beam of our flashlight. We returned to bed, trying to convince ourselves it was nothing. But the noises continued, and each time we checked, there was nothing there. The next morning, we woke up feeling exhausted. Our sleep had been plagued by vivid nightmares. In my dreams, I saw reflections in the mirror that didn't match reality. I saw myself, but with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Kevin had similar dreams, and we both felt a growing sense of unease. Determined to get to the bottom of this, we started researching the cabin's history. We discovered that it had once been owned by a family who disappeared mysteriously. The locals whispered about dark secrets and strange occurrences, but no one knew the full story. The more we dug, the more we realized that the mirror might be the key to understanding what was happening. That night, as we sat in the living room, we heard the footsteps again. This time they were louder, echoing through the cabin. We decided to confront whatever was in the attic. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, we climbed the stairs one last time. As we entered the attic, we saw something we hadn't noticed before. The mirror was glowing faintly. We approached it cautiously. As we stood in front of the mirror, our reflection seemed to shift and change. We saw the family that had once lived here, a mother, a father, and 2 children. They looked sad and frightened. Then, their reflections began to move independently of us. They reached out, their hands pressing against the glass as if trying to escape. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the air around us seemed to thicken. We heard whispers, soft and mournful, filling the room. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and we felt a pull as if it were drawing us in. We tried to step back, but our feet were rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, and we could see the family's faces contorting in pain. They were trapped, and the mirror was their prison. Desperate to help them, we reached out and touched the glass. Instantly, a shock ran through our bodies, and the room spun around us. When we came to, we were lying on the floor of the attic. The mirror was shattered, its pieces scattered around us. The room was silent, and the oppressive feeling was gone. We stumbled downstairs, our minds reeling from what had happened. We packed our bags and left the cabin, not daring to look back. As we drove away, we couldn't shake off the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something terrible. The mirror was gone, but the memories of that night would haunt us forever. We never spoke of it again, but the echoing footsteps and the sad faces in the mirror remained etched in our minds, a reminder of the dark secrets that some places hold. I had just moved into my new apartment a few weeks ago. It was a high-rise building in the city, modern and sleek, with a great view of the skyline. My name is Mark, and I have been living alone since I graduated from college. This was my first time having a place of my own, and I was excited to enjoy the independence. After a long day at work, I returned to my apartment feeling exhausted. I planned to relax, maybe watch a movie and unwind. The apartment was on the 15th floor, and the view of the city lights at night was always calming. I put my things away, changed into comfortable clothes, and settled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn. As I started the movie, I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was part of the movie, but it persisted even during the quiet scenes. I paused the movie and listened carefully. The knocking was coming from the front door. I felt a bit uneasy, but told myself it was probably just a neighbor or someone at the wrong door. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I shrugged it off, thinking it must have been a prank or maybe someone had already left. I went back to the couch and resumed the movie. A few minutes later, the knocking started again. This time it was louder and more persistent. I felt a chill of fear. I walked back to the door and checked the peephole again. Still, no one was there. I stood there for a moment, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a prank? Or was someone trying to scare me? I decided to ignore it and went back to the couch. But the knocking didn't stop. Instead, it seemed to move around the apartment. First, it was at the front door. Then it sounded like it was coming from the walls, and then from the ceiling. It was as if someone was inside the apartment, moving around and knocking on different surfaces. I felt my heart pound in my chest. I knew I had to find out what was causing the noise. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and decided to check the apartment thoroughly. I started with the bedroom, shining the flashlight into every corner and closet. Nothing. I moved to the bathroom, checking behind the shower curtain and under the sink. Still nothing. As I stood in the hallway, I remembered something the landlord had mentioned during the tour. There was an old storage room in the basement that connected to the apartment through a forgotten maintenance tunnel. He had said it was locked and rarely used, but the memory of it sent a shiver of unease through me. I decided to check the basement. If there was a way for someone to get into the apartment, it had to be through that tunnel. I grabbed my keys and headed to the elevator. The ride down to the basement felt like it took forever. The air grew colder and more oppressive as the elevator descended. When the doors opened, I stepped into the dimly lit basement. The storage room was at the far end of the basement, down a long, narrow hallway. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The walls were lined with old pipes and cobwebs, and the air smelled musty. I finally reached the storage room door. It was an old, heavy wooden door with a rusty lock. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it turned. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, cluttered space filled with old furniture and boxes. I stepped inside, my flashlight sweeping the room. In the far corner, I saw the entrance to the maintenance tunnel. It was a narrow, dark passage that seemed to go on forever. I knew I had to make sure it was secure. I walked towards the tunnel, each step echoing in the silent room. As I reached the entrance, I noticed that the tunnel door was slightly ajar. My heart raced as I pushed it open and shone the flashlight inside. The tunnel was empty, but I could feel a cold draft coming from within. I stepped inside the tunnel, my flashlight barely illuminating the walls. The further I went, the colder it became. I could hear my breathing, loud and ragged in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the end of the tunnel. There was another door similar to the one in the basement. I pushed it open and found myself in a small room filled with old maintenance equipment. I looked around, trying to find any signs of an intruder. Suddenly, I heard the knocking again, this time directly behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam trembling. There was no one there. I backed out of the room and closed the door, locking it securely. I made my way back through the tunnel, my nerves on edge. When I finally emerged in the basement, I locked the storage room door and hurried back to the elevator. Back in my apartment, the knocking had stopped. The silence was almost more unnerving than the noise had been. I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, but I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I sat on the couch trying to calm my racing heart. The city lights outside seemed distant and cold. I knew I wouldn't be able to relax or sleep after what had happened. The thought of someone being able to access my apartment through the tunnel was terrifying. I stayed up all night, alert to every sound. As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, I finally felt a sense of relief. The day brought a semblance of safety, but I knew I had to talk to the landlord about securing the storage room and the maintenance tunnel. The experience left me shaken, but it also taught me to be more cautious. Living alone had its perks, but it also meant I had to be responsible for my safety. The city was full of mysteries and dangers, and I had just encountered one of them. I hoped I would never have to face something like that again. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to go camping in a remote forest. We were excited to reconnect and enjoy nature. It was early summer, and the weather was perfect for a weekend away from the city. Our group consisted of me, Jake, Lisa, and Tom. We had been friends since high school, and this trip was our way of catching up after busy months of work and life. We packed our gear and drove out to the forest on a Friday afternoon. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. As we got deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves in a soft green glow. We finally reached our campsite, a small clearing near a quiet stream. We set up our tents and built a campfire. The air was filled with the smell of pine and fresh earth. That first night, we sat around the campfire telling stories and roasting marshmallows. The flames flickered and danced, casting long shadows among the trees. We laughed and reminisced about old times. Everything felt perfect, almost magical. After a while, we decided to go to bed, tired from the long day and looking forward to exploring the forest the next day. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun was just rising, casting a golden light over the campsite. I noticed that Jake's tent was empty. At first, I thought he might have gone for a walk or to the stream for some water. But as time passed and he didn't return, we started to get worried. "Where could Jake be?" Lisa asked, her voice tinged with concern. Tom suggested we split up and search for him. We agreed and set off in different directions, calling out his name. I headed towards the stream where we often spent time in the past. The forest was quiet, except for the sound of birds and the rustling of leaves. As I approached the stream, I saw something strange. Jake's backpack was lying on the ground, but there was no sign of him. I called out for him again, but there was no answer. I picked up the backpack and returned to the campsite. Lisa and Tom were already there, looking worried. "Did you find anything?" Tom asked. I showed them the backpack. "I found this by the stream, but there's no sign of Jake." We decided to search the forest more thoroughly. We marked our campsite with bright ribbons and ventured deeper into the woods. As we walked, we noticed something odd. The forest felt different, almost alive. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the air grew thick and heavy. We came across another clearing, smaller than our campsite. In the center was a circle of stones, and within the circle the ground was bare, as if nothing had ever grown there. It felt eerie, but we didn't have time to ponder it. We continued our search, calling out for Jake. By the time the sun began to set, we still hadn't found him. We returned to our campsite, exhausted and scared. That night, strange things began to happen. Personal belongings started disappearing. Lisa's flashlight, Tom's jacket, and even some of our food were missing. We heard eerie sounds, whispers in the wind, and footsteps that seemed to come from nowhere. As the night wore on, we saw glimpses of Jake in the distance. He looked different, almost ghostly. He would appear for a moment and then vanish into the darkness. We tried to follow him, but he always slipped away. The next morning, we were even more determined to find out what was happening. We remembered hearing an old legend about this forest, stories about people vanishing without a trace. According to the legend, the forest was haunted by spirits who lured people away and trapped them forever. We decided to find out more. We searched for any clues that might explain the strange occurrences. We found old carvings on the trees, symbols we didn't understand. We also found a hidden path that seemed to lead deeper into the forest, a path that felt ancient and forbidden. As we followed the path, the forest grew darker and colder. We felt an overwhelming sense of dread, but we pressed on. The path led us to a large ancient tree. Its roots were gnarled and twisted, and its branches stretched out like skeletal arms. In front of the tree was a small wooden cabin, half hidden by the underbrush. We approached the cabin cautiously. The door creaked open, and inside, we found signs of recent activity. There were empty food cans, a makeshift bed, and more of those strange symbols carved into the walls. Suddenly, we heard a noise behind us. We turned to see Jake standing there, but he wasn't the same. His eyes were vacant, and he moved stiffly like a puppet on strings. "Jake, is that you?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he started to walk towards us, his movements jerky and unnatural. We backed away, fear gripping our hearts. It was then that we realized the forest had taken him and he was no longer our friend. We ran back to the campsite, our minds racing. We had to get out of the forest before it took us too. We grabbed our belongings and started packing up. But as we were about to leave, we heard the whispers again, closer this time. We didn't look back. We ran through the forest following the ribbons we had tied to the trees. The forest seemed to fight against us, branches snagging our clothes and roots tripping our steps. But we didn't stop. We could feel the presence of the forest closing in on us. Finally, we broke through the tree line and reached our car. We jumped in, and Tom started the engine. As we drove away, we saw Jake standing at the edge of the forest, watching us with those vacant eyes. We didn't stop until we were miles away, back in the safety of the city. We never spoke of that trip again. The forest had taken something from us, something we could never get back. We had gone there to reconnect and enjoy nature, but we left forever changed, haunted by the memory of what we had lost. I've always been close to my family, especially my brother Sam. We grew up together, played together, and even ended up working together. Sam is also a truck driver like me. We share stories about our long hauls, the things we see on the road, and the strange people we meet. But there's one story I've never told him. It happened one night on a lonely stretch of highway, and it still haunts me. Sam and I have a routine where we call each other every evening, no matter where we are. It's our way of staying connected even when we're miles apart. That night I had just hung up the phone after talking to Sam. He was parked at a rest stop, safe and sound. I was still driving, the road stretching endlessly before me. The night was dark, with only my headlights cutting through the thick blackness. The highway was empty, a long ribbon of asphalt with no signs of life. The hum of the engine was my only companion. The air inside the cab was cool, thanks to the AC, but I could feel the cold creeping in from outside. The radio played softly, a country song about lost love and broken dreams. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was just past midnight. As I drove, I noticed a shadow on the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a deer or some other animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were standing still, just outside the reach of my headlights. I slowed down, thinking they might need help. It's not uncommon to see hitchhikers or stranded drivers on these lonely highways. I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down my window. "Do you need help?" I called out, but there was no response. The figure remained motionless, shrouded in darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe they were just scared or in shock. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the truck. The night air was cold and still, and the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots. I pointed the flashlight towards the figure, and that's when I saw him clearly for the first time. He was a man dressed in tattered clothes, his face pale and gaunt. His eyes were wide and vacant, staring right at me. "Are you okay?" I asked again, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving. I felt a sense of unease grow inside me. Something wasn't right. I decided to get back in my truck and call for help. As I turned to go back, I heard a rustling sound behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly. The man was gone. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area with the flashlight. There was no sign of him. It was like he had vanished into thin air. I quickly got back into the truck and locked the doors. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone to call Sam. "Hey, what's up?" Sam answered, his voice cheerful. "Sam? I just saw something weird," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There was a man on the side of the road, but now he's gone." "Maybe he just walked off," Sam suggested. "You know how people are. They get scared and run away." "Yeah, maybe," I agreed, but I didn't believe it. There was something off about that man. I decided to keep driving and find the nearest rest stop. I needed to get off the road and clear my head. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, and every sound made me jump. The highway, once familiar and routine, now felt menacing and strange. I kept glancing in my mirrors, half expecting to see the man again. After what felt like hours, I finally saw the lights of a rest stop up ahead. I pulled in and parked the truck, grateful for the bright lights and the presence of other people. I decided to stay there for the night. I climbed into the sleeper cab, locked the doors, and pulled the curtains shut. I lay there in the dark, trying to calm my racing heart. I listened to the sounds of the rest stop, the distant hum of engines, the occasional footsteps, the murmur of voices. It was a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone. Just as I was starting to relax, I heard a soft tapping on the window. My heart jumped into my throat. I stayed still, listening. The tapping continued, slow and deliberate. I reached for my flashlight and shone it towards the window. There was nothing there. I lay back down, flashlight clutched in my hand. I didn't sleep much that night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. The next morning, I called Sam again and told him everything. He listened quietly, then said, Maybe it was just your imagination. Long hours on the road can do that to you. Maybe, I said, but I knew what I saw was real. I could still see the man's vacant eyes staring at me, still hear the rustling sound as he disappeared. I never saw him again, but that night changed me. The highway, once a place of freedom and adventure, now felt haunted and dangerous. Sam and I still share our stories, but I keep that one to myself. It's a reminder that no matter how familiar the road seems, there's always something lurking in the shadows waiting for the right moment to step into the light. In 2006, I spent a quiet night alone at my family's farmhouse. My parents were away for the weekend, and I thought it would be a good chance to relax and get some peace. The farmhouse was isolated, surrounded by fields and a thick forest. It was an old, creaky house, but it was home. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the fields. I parked my car and took a deep breath of the fresh country air. I carried my bags inside and locked the door behind me. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I made a simple dinner and ate at the kitchen table, looking out at the dark landscape. The sky turned a deep purple, and soon it was pitch black outside. I turned on a few lights and settled in the living room with a book. As I read, I started to hear strange noises. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling. The wind was blowing outside, making the trees rustle and the shutters creak. But then I heard a distinct sound like footsteps crunching on gravel. I froze, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal or my imagination. I forced myself to continue reading, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The footsteps seemed to circle the house, stopping and starting again. I put down my book and listened closely. There it was again, the sound of someone walking outside. I stood up and went to the window, peeking through the curtains. I couldn't see anything in the darkness. I told myself it was nothing and decided to check the back door, just to be safe. As I walked into the hallway, I noticed something strange. There were muddy footprints on the floor leading from the back door to the living room. My heart skipped a beat. Someone had been inside the house. I quickly checked the door and saw that it was locked. How did they get in? I felt a chill run down my spine. I had to stay calm and think. I remembered that we had security cameras around the house. I hurried to the study where the security monitor was. My hands were shaking as I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing various angles of the farmhouse. I scanned the footage, my eyes darting from one camera to another. Everything looked normal at first, just the empty fields and the dark forest. But then, on one of the cameras, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a masked figure standing by the edge of the forest, watching the house. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hand. The figure was still, like a statue, just staring. I switched to another camera. The same figure was closer now, moving towards the house. I felt a surge of panic. I grabbed my phone and tried to call for help, but there was no signal. The farmhouse was too isolated. I was on my own. I had to find a way to protect myself. I couldn't just sit and wait for the intruder to break in. I needed a plan. I locked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. I found a heavy metal flashlight and held it tightly, feeling a bit more confident. I went back to the living room and turned off the lights, hoping to make it harder for the intruder to see inside. I crouched behind the sofa, peeking out occasionally to see if I could spot the masked figure. The house was silent, except for the sound of my breathing. Minutes felt like hours. I kept checking the security monitor, watching the figure move closer and closer. Finally, the figure reached the back door. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't be able to get in. To my horror, the handle turned and the door creaked open. I had been sure I locked it. How did they manage to unlock it? The figure stepped inside, moving silently through the house. I could see them on the monitor, making their way to the living room. I had to act fast. I remembered there was a back exit in the basement. If I could reach it, I might be able to escape and run to the neighbors for help. I moved quietly, keeping low to the ground. I reached the basement door and slowly opened it, praying it wouldn't make a sound. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The basement was dark and cold. I fumbled for the light switch but decided against it. The darkness was my ally now. I made my way to the back exit, feeling my way along the walls. Suddenly, I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. The intruder was following me. I quickened my pace, trying to stay silent. I reached the exit and slowly turned the handle. It was locked from the outside. My heart sank. I was trapped. I could hear the footsteps getting closer. I needed to find a hiding spot. I saw an old wardrobe in the corner and quickly climbed inside, closing the door behind me. I tried to control my breathing, listening for any sound. The basement door creaked open, and the footsteps entered the room. I could hear the intruder moving around, searching for me. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't find me. Minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity. The footsteps came closer, stopping right in front of the wardrobe. I could see the shadow of the figure through the crack in the door. Just when I thought I was doomed, I heard a loud bang from upstairs. The figure froze, then quickly turned and ran back up the stairs. I waited, listening as the footsteps faded away. I stayed hidden for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. When I was sure the intruder was gone, I carefully climbed out of the wardrobe and made my way back upstairs. The house was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I found my phone and saw that the signal was back. I quickly called the police and told them everything. They arrived shortly after and searched the house and surrounding area, but the intruder was long gone. The police told me I was lucky to be unharmed. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the night, and I agreed. I grabbed my things and left the farmhouse, not looking back. That night changed everything. I never felt safe at the farmhouse again. The thought of the masked figure watching me still haunts my dreams. I learned to always be aware of my surroundings and to trust my instincts. It was a lesson I would never forget.